Tonight, we're going to be talking about fun stuff, budgeting, dues, 990s, all the other things a chapter treasurer needs to deal with. And we'll probably be using some terminology you know and teaching you some terminology that you need to know. All right. So let's start. The first thing a chapter treasurer really needs to start doing is to build a budget. And luckily, I believe in most of our chapters, y'all are doing a good job of this. But every once in a while, it gets forgotten. We need to reset. And sometimes we inherit a budget that wasn't actually that feasible. Now, don't panic. Building a budget isn't as difficult as one may think, but there are some things we have to do and be intentional about. And every chapter is different. Some of you have houses, some of you have kitchens, some of you have third party accountants who do a lot of this for you. Some of you have to deal with rent, some of you don't. I'm going to talk about this from a relatively simple form and review it from a chapter size, not thinking about housing or kitchen. Because, well, one second it gets involved, and especially if you're responsible for uh, taxes or if you have an employee, I hope you're working with an accounting firm and a third party, and I believe most of you are, or your alumni association is taking the lead on it. Uh, that said, when we're dealing with rent, when we're dealing with kitchen fees, anything instead, it is absolutely the chapter's responsibility and therefore the chapter treasurer's responsibility to ensure that it's being collected and being paid in full. You might be using a third party to assist with that, but that doesn't mean it's not a part of your job. Uh, and think about it this way and why that is. First, you as the undergraduate chapter, you control and influence membership and incentives. I don't believe any of our alumni associations are living in the chapter house and have day-to-day oversight over our chapters. That is what you have. Um, Also, at least for us and the fees that we charge the chapter, they're based on the reports submitted by the undergraduate chapter. Uh, After all, no one but you knows who's being allowed at events. No one knows that better. And finally, most importantly, this crazy thing that we call fraternity, it's all about self governance. And I mean this with all due respect, but if we can't manage this part, how are we going to be able to trust you to do things like run events safely? Um, so when you're building a budget, there's an order to things. I use this graphic a lot because I'm a big fan of the far side, but first pants, then shoes. So when you're building a budget, you got to think about what comes first. Where do you start? The income or the expenses? And I'll tell you, you need to start with the expenses first. Uh, don't start with thinking, oh, we want membership dues to be $500 a semester and try to build your budget out that way. There's always going to be some back and forth, but you're going to be able to do a much better job if you go in to the income side with a more open mind. So let's say you started with nothing. Well, actually, hopefully you didn't start with nothing and you were able to look at last year's budget, or especially you had profit and loss statements, income expense, whatever you want to call it, the budget and how you performed over prior years, and be able to look at that for multiple years to get an idea of what your expenses need to look like. Also, even besides buzzwords like inflation, many chapters, they want to do a little bit more. So don't be, know that you may have to alter some of those expenses and spend a little bit more. Uh, if you're starting with nothing, worst case scenario, then it takes a little bit more work. But round up your chairs and have them estimate what they feel they will need over the course of the semester. And if they give you an answer in about 5 minutes after you ask them, they probably haven't given it enough thought. But go to your recruitment chairs. Ask them how many events they think they'll have. Do they want to do things like have rush t-shirts? Uh, do they plan to reimburse brothers for meals with potential members? have them think through and work through what they want. Just like just like you, have them come up with their expenses first. Now, also, when you're reaching out to your different chairs and they're coming up with numbers of what they want and why they want it, that doesn't mean just because they ask for it, they can necessarily get it. But it gives you a good idea of their needs and maybe how to work through with them to best balance a budget. Now, there are fees associated with the national fraternity. And we have an assessment schedule. Actually, I believe all of you have already been sent it for next year. But the member tax is $220 per member per year. The chapter services fee is $975 a semester, so $1950 per year per chapter, not per member. Uh, Half of it's due October 1st, half of it's due March 1st. And then we have an initiation fee for all new members of $265 per member. Now, you don't pay the member tax and the initiation fee in the same year. It's one or the other. Kind of think of that as the member tax plus the cost of a badge and certificate. And the final part, and I apologize the most about this because uh, it's the one that changes the most from chapter to chapter, is called the risk management assessment. And that's what everyone's the most excited about because it covers insurance. But it is very important. I can assure you, for most all of the campuses we're at, you can't operate without us providing a certificate of insurance to your college or university. I should have these invoices out next week. Um, Honestly, if you're a housed group, it's probably going to be very similar to the member tax. Um, and really, I can't tell you for certain because I get an invoice from our insurance company, and then we divide it up equally among chapters based on the membership reports they submitted at the end of last spring, that graduate report that some of you may have worked with Keith Willard on, our director of member services. But we take that number of returning members as reported to us, give that to our insurance company, and and how many houses we have, and they tell us here's what you have to pay in insurance. So we looked at that membership size. We look at whether or not you have a house. That's a big part of it. And then also there are some other factors taken into account. And luckily, and I'm knock on wood as I say this, we haven't had any large claims in recent years, but if we have a chapter with a large claim, they do pay more. Um, the risk management assessment, when we send out that invoice, unless there's something we clearly made as a mistake, that's in stone. Because again, that's from the invoice of what we've gotten from our insurance company. But member tax, which is a per member bill, that we will adjust accordingly. If someone told you they were going to be back in classes this fall, but for whatever reason they decide not to come back, maybe they study abroad, we can give you a credit as long as you update your rosters to us no later than October 1st. If there's something weird going on where you need a little bit more time, just communicate with us and we will work with you on it. Now, if it's May 1st and you're telling us someone wasn't a member, we might not be able to work with you as much. But I promise you, we'll always do our best. Um, Then for the chapter expenses, a lot of these, well, you know your campus, you know your chapter better. Again, I kept this uh, sample sheet very simple and more towards an unhoused chapter. But there's something that I want to point out on this expense sheet that is very important for chapters to do, and I notice all chapters don't do it. Here I call it bad debt. Sometimes you might call it doubtful accounts. But I want you all to think, how many of you actually collect 100% of your dues? Things come up. Again, brothers might not return to campus, or more commonly, what happens here is brothers just don't pay or don't pay in full. Um, you've got to look at where you've had deficits in the past, and that's what that expense category catches. If you're not doing it, I would recommend at least a 10% allowance. But hopefully, and in some of our chapters, it's healthier than that. But don't plan on everything going perfectly because it never does. And trust me, it's always great at the end of the year to have a surplus. Um, but the reality is, brothers who don't pay, that's just damaging as unexpected and unwanted expenses. Another thing to keep in mind, I often get questions about philanthropy and service events. What we mean by this is the cost that you're giving to your philanthropy service committee, not necessarily the money that you're raising. In some cases, you'll be donating money to you won't ever actually touch the cash that you are collecting. For example, a very common fundraiser that many chapters take part in is Movember. You don't actually collect money on behalf of Movember. People donate directly through a team page and it never goes to the chapter. If you do collect money, it's perfectly fine to estimate and put that in there, but just make sure your income and expense totals the same. So it's not necessary for budgeting purposes. And something that does come up, and we'll might talk about this a little bit more later. Uh, it is appropriate if you're running a philanthropy and you do collect the money and you have out-of-pocket expenses that cost you money. Let's say you have to rent space to hold the event, rent a stage, something like that. Or maybe there was food there that you provided. Um, it's appropriate for you to take that out of any income that the chapter makes from the event before donating the proceeds. Think of it as making it a net donation. You don't have to do this, and some chapters don't, and that's great, but it is okay to do that. What is not appropriate is for the chapter to collect that some of that income, pay themselves an hourly wage, and basically spend it on yourself. That's fundraising is a thing, and we're going to talk about that later. But you need to be totally upfront about that and transparent about it, and take a look at what your campus rules are, because I know some campuses don't allow net fundraising or net philanthropy. Um, Another minor thing here, there's something here for formal and social expenses, but that does not mean alcohol. Chapters are not allowed to buy alcohol with chapter funds. There's no exceptions, there's no workaround. We do not allow that. If you're holding social events, we will talk about social events with social chairs later. They need to be BYOB, or you can pay to have a third party service that is licensed and insured to serve beverages. So the next side is income. And quite frankly, for pretty much all of our chapters, that's much, much simpler to calculate. That's one of the reasons why it's better to start with expenses. Um, and the vast majority of our income is easy, limited, and consistent. It's from our members, whether it's new members or returning members. Some chapters I know have pledge fees as well, and it's perfectly fine if you want to do that in addition to an initiation fee, but that's up to a chapter. We don't charge per pledge, we only charge per initiate. Um, and again, this is one of the reasons why it's better to calculate expenses first. Um, You'll know the number of brothers you have. You can divide that, or brothers returning, you can divide that and then see how close that is to membership dues, the membership dues you may have wanted. If you don't like the number, if it comes back too high, well, then you go back to your expense sheet and start cutting expenses. And I'll be honest, I've never built a budget once and got it right the first time. So don't feel bad if there's a lot of back and forth. Uh, but again, it's easier to start with expenses first. And then there are some ways you can find additional income. Um, some chapters are able to fundraise and fundraise successfully. If you've never done it before, Don't plan on it going well because, especially in year one, it's never going to go as well as you think. Uh, but I would recommend if you are planning on something and you have a plan in place and you feel it's attainable, tie it to an expense that if, well, let's say it ends up failing, it's an expense you don't need to incur. Also, some alumni organizations absolutely do assist with donations. Not all. I think everyone makes the assumption that alumni help greatly with expenses for a chapter. That's not always the case. Um, and a lot of times when they make those donations, it's through the Alumni Association, not to the undergraduate chapter. I can't stress this enough. If you want to ask your alums for money, do it. Connect with your alumni advisor, connect with your alumni president, and work together with them. It will always be more successful if you're working with them and allowing them to be the mouthpiece to collect those donations. And the second thing is ask for something and have a goal. Don't just say, hey, we'd like help, we'd like some money to help. Say what you're raising money for. People will be much, much more interested, alums will be much more interested in giving to that.
I think the Syracuse chapter was able to do a lot of successful fundraising
With what?
with that exact theory in mind. They had a goal. They weren't just looking for money, they were looking to do something with that, and suddenly money started pouring in.
Yep. And that's, and a lot of times it can come in excess. And another great point with that is they used the Alumni Association. It wasn't the undergraduate chapter helped. I think they even made some phone calls, and some of our chapters do a great job of that and doing phone-a-thons. But if they're doing it with the Alumni Association, it's going to work much, much better. Um, and even if that's specific, and I'll give you some many alums do want to be involved. And one, I won't, well, I don't know if this would be embarrassing, but I won't out the chapter. One of the things that I think one of our chapters did that was really nice and actually led to quite a lot of donations is they started asking their alums, hey, when we initiate new members, we want to buy them nice letters. We want to buy them the expensive sweaters to say "SciU" on them. Well, you help us do that and sponsor a new member. And they started to get, especially after year 2 and 3, so many alums giving money that they were actually making more money than they were, well, the sweaters they were buying. So there's a way to do that successfully. And one of the reasons why a lot of people gave is they took pictures, shared those pictures. And actually, I was told if an alum sponsored the sweater, whoever did the embroidery that they were working with stitched that alum's name into, I believe, the back of the sweater on the inside so that brother would always see and know who donated that money. But I thought that was brilliant. And I know a couple years down the road, they were having the problem up and the great problem of having, we only have 15, 20 new members, and we have about 50 alums who want to sponsor. What do we do now? So make people feel good when they make a gift, let them know it was spent in the right way, and they're likely to not only give more, but more alums will give as well. But if you haven't done it yet, you might not knock it out of the park in year one. So don't make a mistake of making the wrong estimate. And a final thing, and I hate to tell you this, but one thing you'll see not on income is charging admission to events. Uh, because if here in the United States, if you're charging admission to any sort of event and you're serving alcohol in pretty much every state, that would require a liquor license. Even though you're not selling the liquor, you are giving, if you're giving out liquor and providing liquor and people are paying to get in almost every state, that would require a liquor license. And again, selling alcohol is also against our risk management standards. I'm not saying any of our chapters would ever do that, but I do need to point that out. Now, if you were having a concert and there's no alcohol there, then that's the kind of thing you could charge admission to. But again, make sure anything you're charging admission to is alcohol free. The second sheet, after you create a budget that you must have, is a list of your accounts receivable. And this needs to be reviewed at every exec and every chapter meeting. This document is not private. And that's not to shame brothers. But if someone's paying late, especially if they're not making a payment plan, uh, quite frankly, the chapter might not be able to do things. And everyone should know who's responsible for that. Quite frankly, that social pressure, sometimes that's the most motivating factor to get brothers to pay their dues. Um, can you allow brothers to pay late? Absolutely. Creating payment plans is perfectly appropriate, but just make sure they work with the cash flow that the chapter needs. Because in some cases, whoever you owe money to might not be able to give you a payment plan. So make sure payment plans are both ways. They're created with you as a treasurer and they are agreed upon on both sides. And another hint that I have to say, and hopefully no one would make, but don't let people put off paying until the end of the semester. Almost without exception, brothers have the most money in their bank account on the first day of classes rather than the last. And especially in the spring semester, make sure that final payment plan is before spring break, not after. I've seen that go wrong many, many times in chapters. Um, But if I'm talking with a chapter, and I understand someone wouldn't know off the top of their head who owes how much, though they should be able to, most people know who if anyone's really delinquent, who that is. Uh, but they should be able to pull that up in minutes, especially nowadays when everyone's got a cell phone and access to this kind of information easily. If someone can't tell me who owes money, in a few minutes, something's wrong. And again, if someone's late in making payments, but you believe they're going to be good for it and there's no issue, put it in writing. Make sure they put it in writing what their plan is and it's something you agree to. There is something out there called collections. Hopefully, we never have to use it. Um, it is very much a last resort. There are some collection agencies that absolutely will work with chapters and help you collect money, but realize anything you send to a collection agency, you're not getting much back. You're getting cents on the dollars that you're collecting. And also, it really can harm someone's future. Bad credit will absolutely affect loans. It can affect being able to rent certain properties. Sometimes jobs even look at people's credit reports. But if you truly have an issue, talk to me and I will try to put you in touch with some third parties. But hopefully there's better routes to go to. We've had a lot of success if you, quite frankly, reach out to parents and let them know that their son or daughter is in debt, that sometimes they will take care of that to avoid this. Also, once you're done with the semester, don't throw out that AR sheet. Make sure you keep it somewhere. Uh, Earlier, we had a session for officers and we talked about making sure every chapter has some sort of Google Drive or equivalent where this information is being kept. Keep these old AR reports, at least for a few years. I just had a call with an alum president earlier today where it ended up he was able to get at this for uh, some outstanding balances that they hadn't recorded very well, and the chapter had access to it. And it was all because the chapter was a lot better at using things like Google Drive than the Alumni Association was. Um, if something's going on and you can't pay uh, an invoice to us on time, please be communicative with us. Uh, don't wait until after the due date or don't wait until the due date. Let us know. We will always do our best to work with you. But And in most cases, absolutely can. But the worst thing is if we're trying to track things down and then we find out the money's not there, and no one's been communicative, it just makes it that much harder to do so. We do have a minor late fee per month of 1% if you don't have an accepted payment plan in place or aren't following it. You create a payment plan that works for both the international fraternity and you, we will not charge late fees then. We've been less aggressive about this in well, when COVID was a thing and even in these post-COVID years, but we're going to start enforcing it again. And again, only if you refuse to make a payment plan with us that works for both parties. All right. And the final thing, when you're creating the budget, like I said before, don't create a to be determined budget or put in some, you know, we're going to do this great fundraiser or we're going to get 100 new members and they're going to cover all our expenses because we're going to raise initiation fees by a lot. Don't expect some miracle to occur that's going to make your fundraising or create a fundraising windfall. And all of a sudden the budget is balanced. Um, One thing that you can do a lot of times when setting dues is it is appropriate to budget in incentives and encourage early payment. Something you'll hear all the time from accountants. Cash is king, uh, but you must account for those. Honestly, if you've never done an incentive before, my recommendation is recommend or expect everyone to get it in year one and budget accordingly. And again, if you get a surplus, because not everyone does, great. And then you kind of have an idea of the percentage you can use going forward. But don't offer an incentive and on the budget side, get surprised when a number of people took advantage of it and you didn't plan for it. Um, think about your cash flow and due dates. Again, for a lot of our chapters, you need cash at the beginning of the semester. Uh, Many of you have recruitment right away in the fall, and that's one of your larger um, expenses. So, what can you do to make sure you're getting as much cash upfront at the beginning of the semester? Have your due dates as early as possible. Um, Again, most brothers have more money in their pocket on the first day of classes. So why not start collecting fees, especially how easy it is to collect remotely before people even get back to campus? I know some of our chapters basically don't start until Labor Day. First date that some of their fall invoice or their fall dues are paid, August 15th. That's awesome. Uh, Also, to help encourage people to give, make sure you're sharing that budget. Review it with the chapter at an early meeting, in at the least once a semester. But that transparency is key. One thing that will motivate people to actually pay their dues is if they understand what it's going towards. Honestly, might seem silly, but that's one of the things that we try to do in Psi Upsilon with our convention is we allow a committee to review our budget as well as performance from prior years. We want you to see that information. Also, I was showing some spreadsheets earlier in this. I brought up Asana before. One of the things that your Asana project links to is a chapter Dropbox well, every chapter has a Dropbox where we put all the invoices, statements, reports we receive from you, so you can review that from prior years, but also those generic templates for creating a budget in an AR sheet. I have those in there for you too. So if it helps, great. Um, and again, that's something that anyone on the chapter services team, Mia, Justin, myself, we're happy to work with you on creating a budget if you don't know where to start. Now, many chapters today are using third parties to help with collections. Some of these are great. Some of them we need to be a little bit careful about, but honestly, in 2025, I don't think anyone's sitting around collecting cash anymore or writing checks. Um, some services even offer online banking as a part of that, and that's becoming more and more helpful because local brick and mortar banks aren't really excited with doing business with small associations like a fraternity on a college campus, where everything's going to be cash and the account's never going to be that large. Um, some of our colleges do allow you to work with them. I believe Purdue requires chapters to use their campus bank, just so they have some oversight of it. But I know in the past a few have done this, but that's usually an exception. Um, but I highly recommend using either Legacy Financial, Omega Financial, Greek Bill. Those are three of the best in the business. They do a good job of managing money easy. They can send out invoices. They can send out invoices to home and parents if the student isn't paying the bills themselves. Um, uh, they work really well, and especially if you're collecting a large amount of money, if you're dealing with rent and housing, I highly, highly, highly recommend using one of those third parties. A lot of you are very familiar with Venmo, and then other things that are similar to it, like Zelle. These are all right. They're not exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're using them, make sure you're using a business account. Um, Quite frankly, and it's still kind of the wild, wild west with some of these online payments. And it doesn't mean it will automatically happen, but any Venmo account that receives, I believe the minimum requirements are at least $20,000 or 200 payments of any kind. It gets reported to the IRS. And some states actually have much lower thresholds. A state that we're really active in, Virginia, for instance. Now, that doesn't mean the IRS will automatically do something, but I heard a horror story about a young man that was a part of another fraternity. I believe it was at the University of Kentucky. I know it was in the state of Kentucky. Was collecting rent and had a lot of money put into a Venmo account, but it was the chapter's money, but it was in his name, and next thing you know, or actually, it wasn't next thing you know, it was about 2 or 3 years after he graduated, he had a letter from the IRS asking for the taxes he owed on that. Um, my understanding, it all got sorted out, but it was pretty scary there for a while. Also, whenever you're using any of those accounts and they're in an individual name, especially, and I'm not talking about who that person is at all, but anyone who has access to that kind of cash, it can get intermingled with their personal funds, and it's very, very, very easy for fraud to occur. And again, I've dealt with this, and sometimes I absolutely believe it was unintentional and it was just sloppy bookkeeping. I've dealt with a case where it definitely wasn't though as well. And it was caused by someone using personal accounts instead of business accounts. Uh, One of the things that helps with having a business account is multiple people can have access and see the transactions and make sure that's the case. Whatever you're using, chapter treasurer should have access as well as the president. And I would highly recommend at least the officers, not not necessarily to spend, but to have the ability to look and see what transactions are happening. If you're using any of these third parties, it's going to cost money. So make sure you're also budgeting for the fees associated. Even if you're using something simple like a Venmo, if you allow people to pay by credit card, there's always going to be a small charge associated with that. Usually with a credit card, it's 3 to 5%. Maybe it's even a little bit more with some of those services, but you've got to plan on it. Um, There are some new groups in the marketplace that I know some chapters are working with. Two of them in particular, Crowded and Switch. I mentioned before, they actually act as an online bank in addition to making collecting money and sending invoices easier. A lot of these new services, they look free, but read the fine print. And if you're confused, uh, talk to me or talk to anyone on the team. We'll try to find it, but I'll put it this way: nothing is free. Every business has to be making money in some way or will be planning to soon in the future. So even if they're selling you something that looks too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. Right. Some other things to keep in mind, some of the stuff I already covered. Don't rely on that financial windfall where we're going to have a really large pledge class. We're going to have this great fundraiser. You are setting yourself up for failure, especially if it hasn't happened before. Don't expect everyone to pay in full. Let's say you did a great job and last year everyone did. Still allow a little bit of bad debt this year. Um, like I say, don't rely on donations and fundraising. Or if you do have that and you've had success with that, budget the same this year as you received last year. Um, it is appropriate to financially assist brothers, but you got to budget for it. Basically, you're offering them a scholarship, and that's okay, and that's awesome because some of our chapters do it and can do it. Um, but that is something you need to plan on. Um, the Sayub Islam Foundation does have some things that can help you out, uh, but I wouldn't put them in the budget because they can't promise them. First of all, any brothers that need financial help, the Sayub Islam Foundation does offer scholarships. The applications go live on November 1st. I believe they're due mid-February, and then they'll be for the next academic year. But please, I know some of you need help, and the foundation absolutely wants to give out money. In addition, they have something they call the Connect Stipend, which, if you're holding an educational event, and it has to be educational in nature, but if you're bringing alumni back to address the chapter about their careers, like some of our chapters have career mentor programs, or really any third party to have an educational session. They will grant up to $1,000 per chapter to that chapter, but reach out to them beforehand to make sure the event you're planning fits within their model. Don't make that assumption. They're willing to work with you. They'll tell you how to make it work. And that way you can be pre-approved for the stipend and not find out, oh, we weren't eligible for whatever reason. There's also a limited amount of funds. So quite frankly, if every chapter were to apply, they couldn't afford that. But right now, I know in most years, there could have been more money given out if more chapters took advantage. That's another thing you can talk with me. Jonathan Chaffin absolutely would be happy to help walk you through it because it is something we want to see chapters take advantage of. Many of our chapters, uh, you have chairs and they're going to ask for reimbursements. Uh, One of the great things about many of these third party apps is they will make that system much easier because two things need to happen. One, pre-approve any reimbursement or have that committee, that chair understand they only have a certain amount of money to spend. And two, if they want to be reimbursed for it, they must have a receipt. Again, a lot of these third party apps, it's nice and easy. You can just take a photo of it and that's all you need. But make sure they have a receipt. Some quick terms that you may have heard in an accounting class or in a finance class that you absolutely should know are just some things about the role. Um, 501c7 versus 501c3. Uh, every fraternity chapter, undergraduate chapter, is a 501c7. We are nonprofits, but that does not mean there are different levels of being a nonprofit. And what it means for a 501c7 is we don't have to pay taxes on donations to us or on anything like membership dues or fees or one off events. That said, you can't, if you have a chapter house, you can't start making meals for people and selling that on the street and basically open up a restaurant. You do something like that, you still have to pay taxes. Likewise, if someone makes a donation to you, there's no tax incentive for them. Sometimes you hear about people writing off a donation on their taxes. That is to a different level of charity. And for instance, Psi Upsilon, we have the Psi Upsilon Foundation. They're a 501c3, so donors get that tax benefit. Right now, almost all of our chapters do not have a foundation associated with them to allow this. Some of our historical houses are able to get that designation, but only for historical purposes. And quite frankly, there's some headaches that align with that. Um, any sort of chapter business account, checking account, make sure it's in the chapter's name. Again, have at least two people, and I would recommend more and include every officer, have access. Every treasurer, archon, first angelos, second angelos. Doesn't mean everyone has spending capability, but everyone has access. The amount of times we've dealt with someone graduating or someone leaving suddenly and they were the only name on the account, uh, it, that can cause a lot of headaches and it is not easy to clean up. Um, Alumni associations and undergraduate chapters are separate legal entities. They are not, well, we look in Psi Upsilon as one chapter. An alumni association is always separate legally than the undergraduate chapter. And just to confuse things, sometimes there's a third house corporation that actually owns the chapter house. Um, right. And one of everyone's favorite topics is taxes. Do you have to pay taxes? Probably not as an undergraduate chapter. Again, unless you're opening up a restaurant or a t-shirt company or something like that, and it's perfectly fine if you sell Rush t-shirts once a year. That's no big deal. But you don't have to pay taxes on almost anything. But that doesn't mean you don't have to file a tax return. You absolutely do. Every chapter has what's known as an EIN, an employee identification number, or also referred to as a tax ID number. If you don't know it, we may have it on file. Basically, what it is a social security number, but for a business or organization. And that's what it operates. It's unique to every organization. You wouldn't have needed it to open a bank account. Sometimes colleges even ask for it for recognition. A lot of these third parties that I talk about will help you with your billing. If they're asking for a bank, you have an EIN. Um, if you create one, get it to us, and that way we can add it to our tax exemption. Make sure you're considered a nonprofit, and that way you don't have to do all the legal work to set up a nonprofit yourself, which in some states isn't difficult, and some chapters have absolutely done it, but it's just easier for us to do it this way. Um, uh, and then we will share that with a company called file990.org. And whenever there's new officers in the chapter, we'll update that information so they'll remind you when and how to pay your taxes. Um, or not pay your taxes, but file your taxes. And what that's called for a nonprofit is a 990. And for any chapter that collects less than $50,000, it's what's called the 990N, and it's easy and free, and you can just file it online once a year. Um, if it's greater than 50,000, and I believe the brackets are between 50 and 200,000, something called the 990 Easy, which is also, like it says, pretty easy to file, a little bit more work. You're going to have to pay a little bit of money to file that, but file990.org can help you with that. I don't believe any undergraduate chapters are collecting more than that. Some alumni associations are, especially if they're dealing with the house and rent. And then they have to file a proper 990. But at that point, if they're collecting that kind of money, I'm hoping they're working with a CPA to do that. Um, Basically, a 990N, all you have to do is, yeah, give them a mailing address for the chapter. You have to disclose an officer name, You have to check a box that says, yep, we collected less than 50,000. You don't have to provide any actual financial statements on the 990N. And then there's some other questions about if you have employees or uh, offer gambling and some other little check boxes like that. But it's nice and easy. This year, we're going to start collecting and storing every chapter's EIN in your Asana project, just so it's definitely somewhere where you can see it. If you have no idea what it is, contact me. Uh, Sometimes, if you have a bank account, they absolutely have it on file. That's sometimes the first place to go. Um, if you ever receive a letter from the IRS, do not ignore it. The good news is, though, there aren't any penalties if you forget to file your taxes for 1 year, even two. It's 3 years when we start running into problems. Uh, if after 3 years, that's when you would have to get your tax ID number reinstated as a nonprofit, and that's going to cost money. It's probably going to cost at least $2,000, and if it goes on for a long time, there may be additional penalties. But file990.org makes it nice and easy, so that should be avoided. Oops. All right. One last thing before we go, because one of the biggest and most fun jobs of every chapter treasurer is actually getting people to pay their dues. One of the things is just making it easy for them. And I understand why a lot of people move to Venmo because it makes it easy. Again, as long as you're using a business account, hey, that works for me. But I really do recommend some of those third-party apps. Even though they cost a little bit, they're even easier, a little bit more transparent. Um, but the biggest thing, it's not the carrot or the stick. Having incentives are good things. Having penalties are good things, and both are necessary to in a chapter. But really, culture is what builds this. If someone isn't paying, take action. Don't ignore it. Be transparent about who's paying and who's not. Make sure the entire chapter knows what your AR statement looks like. Um, Especially unexcused late payments. At that point, make sure it's public so it doesn't get out of hand. Um, don't rely on fines. They help as a reminder. A lot of times they won't fix the problem, but take away what people care about the most. If you don't pay your dues, you can't go to social events. You can't go to formal. You can't be a part of the composite. I've learned that composite can be a big deal and really motivate, especially upperclassmen, to make sure they're paid in full. Um, Make sure every member, we're about to start the recruitment process on many of our campuses. Make sure everyone knows what's expected for them to pay. Quite frankly, we're not being good brothers if we're offering people bids and then telling them afterwards, oh, by the way, here's what it costs. Be upfront about that. Um, and then when it comes to initiation, get that payment before initiation or at least at it. Don't wait until weeks after. Um, do your best, and I know I don't make this perfect either, but do your best to make sure members know what their dues will be next year at the end of the spring semester or at the end of the fall semester. Make sure they know what they're going to pay at the beginning of the spring semester, or at least give them brackets. But let everyone know what they need to save up before the semester starts. All right. Well, I wanted this to take about an hour. We're at just about, well, 50 minutes of presentation time. Uh, and I know this is a small group, but I don't know if any of you have any questions. If anyone watching this at home ever does, please, please, please ask me. I'm sure there's things I missed, especially things that might be specific to your campus or the culture of your chapter and how you do things. And I want to be sure that I work you through any problems that you have. I might not have the answers you're looking for. I might not be able to give you the answers you want, but I promise you, I will tell you the truth and I'll try to get you there.